I remember during the general election going to an estate in Kinloch in North Leitrim. And Kinloch was really a place where lots of estates were built. It was seen as cheaper housing for people who were working in Sligo, and it wasn't that far. And it is indeed a beautiful corner of the country. And I knocked on the door of a young woman who was pregnant and due her baby, I think on the same day as the election, so I think possibly the canvassing didn't go too well. But the point was that as she looked out in front of her, there was nothing but an empty field. The estate wasn't finished. There were about 7 people living in it. The same story that you have heard over and again. But on that day of the canvass, I was talking to somebody who'd lived in America for some time and who said that, you know, the American system for all of that was that you built the amenities first. You were not allowed to build a house until you'd put the parks and the swings and you'd cleaned up. And I know we are now looking at the jumble of the mess that we have, but we should also take cognizance of the future and say perhaps that's something that we could do very practically, and so that all those problems of developers supposedly putting money into safe places that would then be used to finish the estates and then they ran off with the money, that wouldn't happen again, and that every plan into the future would have that built in, and that would be seen first. However, the story about Kinloch, I would just like to draw attention really to the fact that Leitrim, you know, one of the most beautiful counties of Ireland, is in fact also the place where there are now the most ghost estates per head of population, and I'm sure, Minister, that you're more than well aware of that figure, and you know the sources of it, and we're unfortunately not making it up. But indeed all those counties, Sligo, Longford, Roscommon and Cavan, and I doubt that there's a single house that was built there, or housing estate that was built there in the last 10 years that wasn't built on the back of the Upper Shannon Renewal Scheme and with tax relief. And all of those counties were exploited in that way. And now what we see is those counties particularly facing enormous amounts of emigration, because they're the places where people flocked for work and people who lived there worked in the construction industry in the main. And Leitrim itself is, if you like, almost, if we were to look at how we might pilot anything for the future in relation to housing, we probably should look at Leitrim, because there's a county that even in the so-called good years, you know, there was higher unemployment there. There was less third-level education there. There were more young men reliant on one industry than on another, and a greater ageing community. And they really did not benefit at all in the way other counties did from the so-called boom. And now they just look around and find themselves the inheritors of more ghost estates. So it's a very cruel irony that has occurred in Leitrim. And so I suppose what I'm saying is that they were promised by the Upper Shannon Renewal Scheme. It was one of those great things. Let's bring prosperity to those counties. That's what it was all about, actually. And that was a very fine thing to want to bring. But it hasn't brought that. And in the destruction of Leitrim and other counties, we now find ourselves in a position where we have, if you like, almost empty counties. And what are we going to offer in its place? We certainly don't want any more schemes based on money or based on tax relief. And I echo Senator Muraku's idea of, you know, the joined up thinking and the need to think creatively here. That in a way, we need to be thinking about the legacy for that county. And obviously extend it beyond that. What we do need, therefore, is active re-engagement with the community to find what strengths there are. And that would require recognising that, of course, housing isn't just simply empty houses. It is, of course, the underpinning of our society, in effect. And we see it mostly in a place like Leitrim, which has great strengths in terms of agriculture and food and tourism. And indeed, all the surveys show a very high level of the caring community and volunteering in Leitrim. And surely there should be something that we can build on that through a social innovation centre, perhaps linked with the IT. And there are also, of course, very strong links between Leitrim and cross-border. We see it with Sligo IT and Southwest College in Enniskillen, and there are certainly opportunities there for Leitrim. So if we were looking to say, talking about creative solutions, it won't just be, Minister, all the ones that have been hurled at you in the months since you took up your post about how to rebuild them or make them safe. It will also be about ensuring that the communities that specifically have been abandoned are reactivated by other departments. And it is by you talking to those other departments and saying, and joining up those dots along the line, and saying they have specifically inherited a very, very poor legacy from that. And they ought, if you like, to be at the top of the pile or top of the heap when we come to talk about regenerating rural communities. Because, you know, I think of that woman in Kinloch and I will always remember her, and I think she went there with an aim of bringing up her family in a community, and she's looking at an empty field and there's about 4 people in the estate. And in a way, she's going to be abandoned along with others unless we think of those as communities and see how can we help to rebuild them. So perhaps there is some merit in looking creatively at, you know, the JobBridge scheme for, you know, for interns, and that's a very welcome scheme, and as is the policing of it that we've seen in recent days. I don't know whether there's merit in extending it specifically to look at ways in which, as Senator Murricu has talked about, you know, doing up houses, or is there any way in which we can make a scheme that applies specifically that would employ people who are looking to learn skills and improve skills, that it would be set down as a scheme that would last a year or 2 years and would take on some of the safer houses and some of the better houses, because we're not talking here about those ones that my colleague Senator O'Donnell will be bulldozing as she goes down the motorway. Finally, I just want to say in regard to Senator Cullinan, he and his party are not the only ones who will share, I suppose, the outrage at the fact that we find ourselves unable to give back to those communities as much money as we would like. I've no doubt, Minister, that you have scoured the pockets and the seams to see how much money you could give to restoring houses, and that the idea that we prefer somehow, that this government prefers to give the money to banks is quite ridiculous. There isn't a single person sitting in this room or sitting in this government that in any way, shape or form enjoys having to give away, so to speak, money to banks when there are people who need it. And he doesn't have a complete control over that kind of outrage. We are all concerned. And you know, we know that this government will be doing its best to try to find ways to deal with the challenges that this creates. So I thank you for your efforts thus far, and we look forward to seeing you in the House again.
Thank you, Senator. No calls on